Welcome to Libeth. A collection is never neutral. The decision to gather things together, to take disparate objects or texts or stories and place them between the same covers, is already an argument, even when it presents itself as merely descriptive. Tales of Old Japan is structured as a mixed-genre collection. Translated tales alongside original essays, alongside personal observation, alongside what amounts to historical documentation. This variety is typically described as one of the book's strengths, evidence of Mitford's range and his ambition to give his British readers a comprehensive view of Japanese culture. But the structure is also a choice with consequences, and those consequences are not neutral either. To arrange Japan as a cabinet of curiosities, everything interesting, everything available for inspection, nothing quite in the context that gave it its original meaning, is to transform a living world into an exhibition. The reader receives the impression of understanding. What they actually receive is a highly selective version of a civilization, organized according to the emotional and intellectual priorities of a Victorian diplomat with a particular audience in mind. The book opens with the 47 rōnin, and this is the first structural choice that needs to be taken seriously. This is the longest piece in the collection, the most historically grounded, the most formally complete as a narrative, and its placement at the beginning is not arbitrary. Mitford understood that a book is shaped by what it puts first, that the first major piece establishes the ethical vocabulary and emotional register, that everything following will be read through. By opening with the rōnin story, he ensures that loyalty, obligation, patient sacrifice, and ritual death are the categories through which his British reader will encounter every subsequent tale and every subsequent essay. The supernatural stories will be read as expressions of a world, animated by the same moral seriousness. The essays on legal custom will be read as the institutional infrastructure of the same ethical order. The seppuku account will be read as the ultimate expression of a logic that was already established in the first pages. The structure is not a container for the content. The structure is the argument. The rōnin tale itself functions less like a narrative and more like a proof. It moves with the logic of a demonstration rather than a story. Each stage is necessary to establish the conditions for the next, and the conclusion is not a surprise, but an inevitability that the internal logic of the material was always moving toward. The setup is precise. A lord is provoked, attacks his provocateur in a space where violence is forbidden, is therefore condemned to ritual death. His retainers become rōnin, masterless men, men whose defining social relationship has been severed. Formally, this should end the story. The lord is dead, the household is dissolved, the obligation is extinguished. But the story does not end there, because the household ethic that the Tokugawa system ran on does not recognize the death of the lord as the termination of obligation. The dead lord is still their lord. The obligation persists. And the rest of the tale is the working out of what it means to honor an obligation to the dead in a political environment that is actively monitoring you for signs of exactly the kind of loyalty you are practicing. The years of apparent dissolution, the leader of the rōnin drinking publicly, frequenting brothels, divorcing his wife so she cannot be used as a hostage against him, performing the complete abandonment of his former self, are the heart of the story and the most structurally significant element. This is not a story about violence. It is a story about concealment, about the absolute subordination of the visible self to a mission that cannot be made visible without destroying itself. The leader does not simply decide to wait. He decides to become someone else entirely for as long as it takes, to sacrifice his reputation, his family relationships, his dignity as a samurai, because those things are less important than what he is waiting to do. This is the logic of total loyalty taken to its extreme. The self is not the thing being protected. The obligation is the thing being protected. The self is a resource to be spent in service of the obligation. And when a man who appeared to have abandoned everything finally moves, when the rōnin attack with ceremony and precision in the middle of winter, the reader understands that the apparent dissolution was always already discipline, that the performance of abandonment was always already the most rigorous form of commitment. The conclusion of the tale makes the argument explicit. The rōnin have fulfilled their obligation. They have avenged their lord, presented his enemy's head at the grave, and surrendered themselves to the authorities. The authorities face an impossible problem. These men have broken the law, and they cannot be permitted to break the law without consequence. But what they have done is also the most perfect expression of the values the legal system is supposed to enforce. The shogun's officials deliberate. The debate that Mitford records is not about guilt. There is no question of guilt, but about which obligation takes precedence. The obligation of the state to enforce its own rules, or the obligation of a civilization to honor its own highest expressions. The ruling is that the rōnin must die, but they must die as samurai, by their own hand, in the ritual form of seppuku, which is a death that affirms everything about who they were rather than negating it. This is the Tokugawa system at its most self-aware. The institutional order executing the individuals who most perfectly embodied the institutional order's own values. Because the institutional order cannot survive if individuals decide for themselves when their private obligations supersede its authority. The tragedy is not incidental. It is the point. The system requires this outcome. And Mitford places this demonstration at the beginning of his book, because everything that follows, every supernatural tale, every essay on vendetta or seppuku, every description of ceremony and custom, needs to be understood as an elaboration of this central logic. The shorter tales that follow do different kinds of work, but serve a common function. They demonstrate range. Mitford understood that his British audience was in danger of reducing Japan to a single image. The noble samurai, the ritual of honor, the serious-faced warrior class, and the variety of the subsequent tales is a corrective to that reduction. The supernatural stories introduce a cosmological dimension that the rōnin tale, for all its moral complexity, does not contain. The Tengu, mountain spirits who teach martial arts to worthy students, show that the extraordinary capacities of the warrior class are understood within the tradition as having sources beyond human training, that the natural and supernatural are not separate domains in Japanese cosmology, but a single continuous field through which forces move. The goblin cat stories introduce transformation, hidden nature, the danger concealed within the familiar, a set of anxieties about the stability of identity and the reliability of appearances that connects directly to the political world of the rōnin tale, where the most dangerous men are those who look like something other than what they are. The ghost stories present the dead as active moral agents, making claims on the living that the living are obligated to fulfill. Taken together, these tales build a cosmological frame around the human ethical dramas, showing that what looks like a code of honor enforced by social pressure is actually a set of obligations that extend into the structure of the world itself, that the dead demand completion not merely as a social convention, but as a metaphysical fact. The essays are placed to do the work that the tales cannot do on their own, which is to give the foreign reader a frame of institutional reference that prevents the tales from being received as pure exotic fantasy. The essay on vendetta is essentially a legal document. It describes the procedural framework within which private killing was authorized and regulated by the Tokugawa state. This is crucial context, because without it, the tales of revenge read as accounts of extralegal violence, of men taking justice into their own hands in defiance of social order. With it, they read as accounts of men operating within a sophisticated legal framework that authorized private violence as a mechanism of household honor maintenance, under specific conditions and with specific procedural requirements. The distinction matters enormously. The vendetta system was not a survival of pre-legal barbarism. It was an institution built into the legal architecture of a centralized state that understood household obligation as a form of social cohesion worth protecting through procedural formalization. Mitford's decision to include the legal essay alongside the tales of vendetta is therefore not merely documentary. It is an argument against the reading of Japan as a place where passion supersedes order. Japan, the structural argument runs, is a place where passion is ordered, where the most intense emotional and moral obligations are organized into institutions, given procedures, made legible to the state. The seppuku essay is the most extraordinary piece in the book, and its placement matters as much as its content. It is not a tale. It is a witness statement, an account of a ritual execution that Mitford attended, at which a samurai convicted of having ordered an attack on French sailors performed his own death in the prescribed manner, before an audience that included the condemned man's own retainers, officials of the Meiji government, and a group of foreign diplomats of whom Mitford was one. The precision and control of the condemned man, the ceremony with which he received the blade, the performance of everything the ritual required up to, and including the moment of death, these Mitford describes with a detachment that is itself a form of argument. He is not performing shock. He is not performing admiration, at least not straightforwardly. He is recording, as precisely as his craft allows, what it looks like when a man treats his own death as the final and most complete expression of who he is. The ritual is not suicide in the Western sense, not the desperate act of someone who has reached the end of their capacity to continue. It is the assertion, through the body, of a claim about value, that what I have been is worth more than the continuation of my life, and that the form of my dying is the clearest possible statement of what I believed and how I lived. The Buddhist and ceremonial descriptions that close the book are sometimes read as anticlimactic, as if Mitford has exhausted his most dramatic material and is filling out the pages with ethnographic padding. This is a misreading. The religious and ceremonial descriptions are the cosmological foundation of everything that precedes them. The ethics of loyalty, the institution of vendetta, the ritual of seppuku, none of these makes full sense without the religious framework within which Japanese civilization understood the relationship between the living and the dead, between individual obligation and cosmic order, between the visible world of social structure and the invisible world of spirits and ancestors. By placing these descriptions at the end rather than the beginning, Mitford is not adding context to stories that are already complete. He is revealing the ground on which the entire structure rests, showing that what looked like a collection of dramatic tales and curious customs is actually a single coherent civilization with a cosmology that runs from the family altar through the legal system to the heavens. The reader who reaches the end of the book should feel not that they have reached a conclusion, but that they have arrived at the beginning of something much larger than the book could contain. What the book cannot do is as revealing as what it does. It cannot give the reader the interior life of the people it describes. Mitford had genuine access to Japanese political and cultural life, more than most Westerners of his time. But his access was always mediated, always structured by the relationships his diplomatic position made possible, and by the categories his own culture provided for interpretation. The Japanese people in his book are seen from the outside, described with sympathy and admiration that is genuine, but never heard thinking their own thoughts about what was happening to them. The ordinary life of ordinary Japanese people is largely absent. The tales and his access were both oriented toward the samurai class and its ethical world, and the vast majority of Japanese people who farmed the land, worked in the cities, and lived entirely outside the samurai culture that Mitford was documenting appear as background rather than subjects. His own politics, his evident sympathy for the Meiji Restoration forces, his sense that modernization was both inevitable and in some respects welcome, are present throughout but never examined, never subjected to the analytical pressure he brings to everything else. And the economic exploitation embedded in the treaty system, the structure of commercial advantage that his own government was maintaining in Japan at the expense of Japanese economic development, is simply not discussed. These are not incidental omissions. They are the shape of the book's limits, and understanding those limits is as important as understanding what the book contains. That's all for today on Libeth. One new book every week. At least we try.